Hello, my name is Josh Lee, and this is my coverage of my special education interviews for Module 3 in EDL 853. Okay, so we interviewed three people. And I did a high school administrator, a middle school special ed teacher, and then an elementary paraprofessional. And this is kind of nice. It gave me perspectives on some different levels. The first question that we asked was to tell us about child find procedures. And so when I talked to the high school administrator, basically, she doesn't deal a lot with child find stuff, and the reason is there obviously you hope that most of those children are identified before they get to the high school level. That's obviously the hope. Now there could be misses, but that's your hope. They do have a SIT team at their high school, and that SIT team works with students who have need for special interventions, and so that would be a group that would identify students if there was going to be more identifications at the high school level. But obviously, again, you hope elementary and middle school take care of most of those. The middle school special ed teacher talked about how the process for child find, there's just too much to it. It takes too long to get through, and her main reason that was an issue was because you end up with students who could use some interventions and a different kind of instruction, but don't necessarily get it as soon as they need it all the time, because you're kind of jumping through hoops trying to figure out the process and get them identified. The elementary para, again, she was working with students who were already identified, so she didn't have a lot of experience with the process of child find. Her students were identified, and she was just providing the interventions or the work with them in class. Next question was, what's the most challenging part of your job? The administrator talked about how, as far as the special ed stuff goes, just ensuring that you could do the right thing. So that, one, the accommodations were there correctly, and then two, that the school had enough staff. You would run into the problem of not having enough paras to cover what you need, or not having the special ed staff you need to get things covered, and just making sure that as much as they can, that you get those things taken care of. The middle school special ed teacher said the most challenging part of her job is the beginning of the year. It's just crazy, and she talked about how there's so much going on, and when you're trying to get all the students placed in the correct classes so they get the help they need, get paras and the coverage for paras taken care of, so you do have students getting those supports they need, and then you still have classes of your own that you're teaching and trying to plan for those like every other teacher is doing. There's just a lot, and she talked about how the beginning of the year is just very, very stressful for her. The elementary para, and just working with students, said the most challenging part is when the students don't just want to quit. They don't want to work, and having that feeling that you care more than they care, kind of that you want them to learn more than they actually want to learn themselves, and that being something that's just kind of weighs on you, and that can be a little bit difficult. And that was the most challenging part of her job. Then we went to the good part, the most rewarding part of your job when it comes to special education. And the admin, she talked about how it was kind of the opposite of what she thought was the most challenging part, but just knowing that we are doing the best we can and that we're meeting those needs, and then being able to see students become successful and grow through a process. So that was hers. It was crazy that the special ed teacher and the para both said the exact same thing. They both talked about the aha moment with a student. When you're working with a special ed student and they had that moment of like, oh, I get this. And they both talk about that same thing. The special ed teacher broke it down to talking about with parents and with teachers as well. And so with parents, it was her most rewarding part was when she goes to like an IEP meeting and she's able to tell the parents, hey, your kid met their goal. And that was a great part. And then with teachers, it was when like teachers got the chance to see their special ed students achieve at the same high level as like their regular ed students, and that was like a big deal for her. The paraprofessional also talked about just when a student shows gratitude and hearing thank you from a student, especially ones who got it. So then we talked about advice and advice about supervising special education staff. So the high school admin said, one, you're going to communicate with students. Two, get to know all the students, know their names, know who they are, and then she said make sure the students feel valued, and that's going to be helpful. The special ed teacher talked about keeping in mind that not all students function the same way, and know that. I mean, going in, you can't do the same thing for every student. It's not a cookie cutter model, she said. And then talking about that each kid needed those different supports and finding ways to get those things in place. And then the paraprofessional talked about just communicate and be open with expectations. I think she was more talking about like the teachers that she works with and saying like, let me know what you need. And then she can talk to the students, let the students know what's needed, just that open lines of communication. The next question is, how do you work effectively with the parents of special needs students? So the high school admin said basically you want to be there at every IEP meeting. Don't overlook one, don't miss one, be there, be present. And then it was interesting, they talked about, when they said being present, they talked about a story of like staying after an IEP meeting when the teachers have all left, stay there and talk to the parents and make sure they have no extra questions or no extra comments. Nothing needs to be cleared up for them, but show that you care and be there that extra few minutes to make sure that everything's taken care of for that parent. The middle school SPED teacher talked about early communication. She actually said communicate. It was a huge thing for her, but using early communication to build up that level of trust with the parents. She talked about how that will make the meetings later on easier. When a parent has a question about what's going on with their student in a certain class, they're able to come talk to you, but you've built that level of trust with them where they feel like that you're somebody they can communicate with and get things done. The paraprofessional talked about how she didn't really work a lot with the parents, mostly because those parents came to the special ed teacher that she was kind of assigned under. So it wasn't something where she had a lot of direct contact with parents. She said, if she had to guess, the biggest thing was just being honest and not making up stories or whatever, not saying things that just weren't true. Just be honest and upfront with the parents. So that was her guess, but again, she didn't have a lot of experience in that field. And then we talked about how do you work with regular ed teachers with students with special needs. So basically when you have these special needs students or special education students who are in these other classes with regular ed teachers who aren't necessarily trained in that field. The high school admin talked about make sure the teachers are knowledgeable on how to do the accommodations. And the idea she brought up is, special ed teachers, and she told a story about when you go into a special ed teacher's classroom, it's just differentiation everywhere. And there's individualized things going on for students all over the classroom. So those special ed teachers are really the access masters. How do we get this stuff to these kids? They know how to do that. And so using those special ed education staff, those teachers, to show other teachers how to do this. How do we differentiate for these kids, and how do we meet these accommodations? Really taking advantage of your resources to do the best thing for kids. The middle school SPED teacher, as far as working with regular education staff, she currently co-teaches classes with 3 different regular education teachers. So she's in the room with some of her special education students as they're receiving their core instruction from these general education teachers. So that's a chance for her to work with general education and keep those two things linked, really connecting the our students versus your students and my students. When we're all in the same room together and working together, it's more of an our student mentality. She also talked about making sure that the IEP snapshots are out to all teachers so they know and have in front of them what accommodations are necessary for students, and then communicate all meetings. Make sure teachers know up front, when's the meeting coming, what do I need from you ahead of time, and that's all taken care of. The paraprofessional talked about just making sure that the regular education teachers know what her students need. When she's working with a handful of students in a classroom, she wants the regular teacher to know what those students need, what their accommodations should be, what modifications they might need, and just making sure that's communicated, and then making sure those regular education teachers know how she can help them as a paraprofessional. So that she doesn't end up in the back of the room just sitting there. Make sure that they're aware of the things that she can do and how she can help them with their instruction. And we talked about what advice do you have for a first-year administrator. The admin said simple: build relationships with staff and students. Since it's all about relationships, that trust, you develop those things early, and that will make things easier for you throughout the year in your first year. The SPED teacher talked about telling you this first year person to just be supportive of all the staff, understand they're all trying to do their best, and then especially with your new teachers, be encouraging, because as a new teacher, things aren't always going to go exactly how you thought they were, and so you need an admin who can encourage you and kind of push you along the way and help you do the right things. The para said from the admin, their advice would just be to communicate with staff and then be very clear on expectations. What do you want from your staff, and let the staff know that. And that's, she's saying as a para, so that's for paras and teachers and everybody. Like, communicate expectations so everybody understands what it is that you want from them. And then we talked about how do you describe the role of the special education teacher and the building principal. And so this is kind of broken down into SPED teacher and admin for each one of them. So the admin said that the role of the SPED teacher is to oversee the accommodations and oversee those students. And really, it's making sure those accommodations are happening and the teachers are aware of what should be happening. The admin's role in this case would be to ensure those things are being carried out correctly. So if there's a question of this isn't happening, the admin is ultimately responsible for the building, and so they've got to make sure things are happening correctly. and then making sure that the lines of communication are always open. So whether that's parent to teacher, parent to admin, wherever it is, that we have lines of communication that are open. The SPED teacher said the role of the SPED teacher is making sure accommodations are being met and that IEPs are current and up to date. That you want to have current goals that matter and that help the student achieve higher, and then the teachers are doing what they should be doing. They said the role of the admin was to run the entire building, but then specifically with special ed stuff to help with staff concerns, and then in IEP meetings to be another voice for the building. So it's not just the special education teacher, that admin is there talking about what can actually happen. The para talked about the role of SPED teachers to oversee the instruction of the SPED students. So that meant not just when they're with the SPED teacher, but oversee that the instruction that's happening from gen ed teachers is the correct instruction and following the correct accommodations. The role of the administrator is being the leader of every part of what occurs in the building. I mean, I got the impression that the paraprofessional didn't work a lot with the principals, but felt like the principal's job is just to be kind of in charge and run everything. And then we talked about what characteristics do you see in aspiring administrators? What do you want to see from them? So the current principal said they want to see someone who is compassionate and actually cares, like not faking it, really cares about the students, the staff, everybody. They want to see someone who has experience, and we talked about special education stuff, so someone who has experience in making accommodations, so they know how to do that. And so when teachers are struggling, you have somebody who can support them and help them in doing the right things, and then being able to stay organized and plan things. The SPED teacher wanted two things: supportive understanding, and she literally said 2 words for that: supportive and understanding. That's what she wanted from a aspiring administrator. And then the paraprofessional, again, I got the feeling she wasn't working with principals a lot, but she would want somebody who's knowledgeable about the laws so they know what should be happening. And then someone who understands that working with SPED students is just different. And so they take that into account when they're talking to those teachers, like this is a different process, and this isn't going to be the same as with every other student. Okay, so thank you for listening. This was a good assignment, seeing 3 different sides of things, especially with me doing it from 3 different levels of school. It became very interesting. Thank you.